Meet the Candidate nights. So you can watch for those. And then we will be passing around a can to collect anybody who wants to donate. We do have small monthly fees on certain things that we do, and so anything that you donate is greatly appreciated. And then we are currently in the process of a fundraiser that is Return of the Jedi, that will be this Saturday at the Kaysville Theater at 2 p.m. And I do have a couple of flyers sitting on my chair down there, so I will pass them back, and if you want to take one and come, that would be great. We appreciate all the support that we get for that. And also we'll be in the Layton Parade for the 4th of July, so you can watch for us then. So with that, well, let's go ahead and, and Brian's wife will be bringing a clipboard. We'll pass it around. If you currently don't receive our emails for what we do, to give you, who the forums are, then sign up your email. We keep them confidential, but we do send out the emails with the information that we have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We appreciate the presentation tonight, and we will have the following. Wade Alexander will be Ben Franklin. Chuck Castleberry, he will be representing George Mason. Gary Dolzer will be George Washington, and Delane England will be Ruth Harrington. And with that, and I'm sorry, I did not call in somebody, but let's go ahead and have an opening prayer real quick. Brian, thank you.
Our gracious Heavenly Father, we're grateful to be here tonight to participate with these fine individuals that have come to share the experiences of history with us, and we are grateful for them and their time, and for the sacrifices of all that have gone into putting this event together tonight. Pray that thy Spirit will be with us, and the Spirit of freedom may be in our hearts. These things we pray for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Amen. And I normally don't conduct. I'm a little rusty, but we need to do the pledge. So everyone will stand.
Thank you.
Please repeat.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
So before we turn the time over to Ben Franklin, I'd just like to turn your attention to the screen over here. These events that we hold are hosted by the Faith Baptist Church in Layton, and they're having a special patriotic service this Sunday, and they would they want to invite anyone that would like to participate to join them this Sunday at 10:30. Okay. And with that, Ben Franklin.
I hope you do not mind that I come down here with you. Allow me, please, to introduce myself. Benjamin Franklin, at your service. Wow. If I get that, I might do that again. I was born January 17th, 1706 in Boston. So I stand before you today at 319, and I don't look bad. My father came to this country seeking religious freedom. My father had 17 children. He was a candle and soap maker. So we did not make a lot of money. And in our day, much like today, those who had the most money were the ones that were at times respected, or people sought after them. Not the same, or not true with my father. He was sought after. People came to him for opinions. People came to him for directions. And it wasn't just people in the church. Our father would invite people into our home about once a month to have meals with us. Now, when I was young, I thought they were there taking food that should have gone to me. But they were teaching. They were teaching his children, letting them know what they did, what they thought. My father had a favorite scripture. It was Proverbs 22:29. Seest thou the diligent man? He standeth before kings. He does not stand before mean men. And how that is translated is, the diligent man is a hard worker. In our day, we had kings, and you bowed before the king. But a diligent, hard-working man was able to stand before the king. Mean man would be translated to wicked man. Now, I wish my father would have lived longer, because I stood with 4 kings, and I even sat with one of them. I had dinner with the king of Denmark. I'll give a little credit to that to my father, who taught his children to be diligent. Many of you may know I only went to school at the age of 10. It stopped. But I had to get an education. We didn't have homeschooling, although I did have a tutor, but we couldn't afford it. I loved books. I loved reading. Whatever subject, that is what I read. That is what I learned. At my age, you should be finding a career as a young man. You should be finding a career, knowing that what you're going to do to support your family. My father would walk me around Boston. There was nothing I was interested in. Nothing. At the age of 12, I signed an agreement, an apprenticeship with my brother James. He owned a print shop and later a newspaper. I agreed to stay with him till the age of 21. While I was working there, I discovered one of his customers had an incredible library. He and I became great friends. I would take books and read and read and read. It was my favorite thing to do. I also loved poetry, and I began to sell poems on the streets of Boston. My brother James said, "Ben, you write great." I said, "Let me write for the paper." He said, "No, do not ask me again." At the age of 16, I invented a character. She was a grandmother, and her name was Silence Dogood. I would sit down at night at my desk pretending to be an older woman. And I would write a letter giving my opinions on the happenings in Boston, the dealings with England. Then I would go into work before anyone else was there, slip the letter under the door, and then come back with everybody else. My brother began to print the letters. Today they are in Philadelphia. They're known as the Silence Dogood letters. The people in Boston fell in love with Silence. People were asking, "Have you read what she wrote today?" She received several marriage proposals. It was me, a 16-year-old boy. I told my brother, thinking we'd get a good laugh. He beat me up. My brother beat me up one more time, and that was it. At 17, I put all my clothing in my 2 front pockets, which lets you know I didn't have a whole lot of clothing. And I left. Went to New York first. Didn't find what I wanted or liked there. I was given some direction. Go to Philadelphia. I remember the day walking into Philadelphia. I was scruffy looking and dirty, but I saw this beautiful young lady standing on a porch. I did not know it then, but a few years later, she would become my wife. We're skipping ahead now. I owned a print shop and a newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, in Philadelphia. I was successful. However, I love science. You may have heard that I took, with my son William, a kite out into the middle of a thunder and rainstorm, lightning too. Very dumb. Do not ever do that. I proved what I already knew, and that was lightning was electricity. The ministers of the time, they were teaching their congregation that lightning is God punishing you for being wicked. Can you imagine living in a neighborhood and your house gets struck by lightning? Your neighbors are going to be going, "Ooh, I wonder what's going on over there." It was rubbish. Lightning was electricity. I invented the lightning rod, shaped much like this, metal. We put it on the homes. We put it on the ships, a wire into the sea or wire into the ground. No more fear of lightning. I had several ministers who were angry with me. Now, I invented several other things. One of them, the grabber. That's what you call it today. Have a handle on it, and you can pick things up. I invented that. My name was the extended arm. Every time I wanted a book, you know where it was? The top shelf. I'd get a stool and drag it all the way across the room, step on it, One time I about fell, and I said to myself, Ben, that's what I called myself, Ben, you got to change this. So I invented the extended arm, or the grabber. I didn't make money, patent, take credit for any of my inventions. Had I, the only people could afford them were the wealthy. They were for everybody. It was time for me to serve my nation, my community, my colony. I sold all that I had. I loved being an Englishman. I'm not afraid to say that. I loved being English. We had a great army to protect us. They were the greatest empire on the earth. We had greater trade around the world. Yes, I know they were being stinkers. I know that. Finally, it got to the point we didn't know what we were going to do. I went to England about 1764, my last time. My goal, if I had to speak to the king himself, now we know that wasn't going to happen. But I wanted them to know we are English. We're not third or fourth cousins twice removed. No one would listen, even my friends in Parliament. Now, they had a party in Boston. You may have heard about that. I think they called it the Boston Tea Party. That didn't make things any better. Now, my wife died in 1774. My lovely Deborah and I were married for 40 years. I was gone for 25 of those years serving my nation. She was so afraid of water she wouldn't travel with me. Now, I went home in 1775. Things were confusing at the least. We did not want to go to war with England. We tried everything. We had called the olive branch letter. We wrote a letter to the king saying to him, "Oh, king, great, handsome, beautiful king, we know none of this is your fault. It's all those men in Parliament." We lied. He didn't even read the letter, called us rebels. June 1776, a committee is formed. That committee wrote what you call today the Declaration of Independence. That consisted myself, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. Thomas basically wrote it in one weekend. Now, there was one line that struck me as we reviewed and replaced this and changed this. He said, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." Now, that's a very religious-sounding line, but I thought it should be stronger. I knew personally that England was larger than Philadelphia. My suggestion was, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That is what we chose. That is what we presented. There is a day in history which we as Americans never even look at. That is July 2nd. That is the day we, as the Continental Congress, voted to declare independence from Great Britain. Now understand this. England had the strongest army in the world. We had a bunch of farmers and store owners. I remember telling the men, we might as well hang together. Most assuredly, we will hang separately. We chose to vote to declare independence. Independence Day, July 4th, we got together, and two men signed it that day, John Hancock and the Secretary of the Continental Congress. Now, I ask the question, why did we sign the Declaration of Independence? I'm going to answer that for you. Freedom, liberty, all of that is true, but I want to tell you right now, you're hearing this from a founding father. We never truly enjoyed the freedom and liberty we fought and died for. We didn't. We signed that declaration for you, for those who would come after us, those citizens of this great nation. The very day we signed the Declaration, England sailed into New York Harbor with the largest armada of ships ever assembled. Were we frightened? Yes. Now, my job, my responsibility was to get the French to help us. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, the French loved me, and I loved them. I set for so many portraits, I swear, my picture hung over the fireplace in every home in France. Now, my job was to get the French to help us. But I had to do some bluffing, storytelling. I told the French that we had 80,000 troops. We were lucky if we had 14,000. I told them it would take England 200,000 troops to beat us. And then they started to fight. We lost battle after battle after battle. George Washington was chased out of New York all over New Jersey. The French are saying to me, "What's happening?" I bluffed again. I said, "Hey, they're falling right into our hands. It's right where we want them." The first battle we won, the French, I believe, were more excited than we were. And they immediately signed the agreement that they were going to support and help America. Now, they didn't go all in right at the beginning. They sent the ammunitions, the cannons. We got the help we needed. There were other diplomats from America there. They thought I should have a firm hand, pound the door, pound the table to get the French to help us. Now, the French have an incredible ability to appear like they're doing nothing, yet accomplish much. I took that upon myself. John Adams was very angry at me. He thought I should be screaming and yelling. After I would get done with the day, I had a home. I had my 2 grandsons with me, Temple and Benny. I worked very hard. I had individuals from other countries coming, wanting to fight for America. Of course, they wanted to be paid. There was one young man, an aristocrat. He had several names. I called him Marquis de Lafayette. He wanted to fight. He was 19. He bought his own ship, sell to America. I gave him a letter to present. He got there and he had his men. He fought and did well. He wrote a letter to his wife explaining why he left. He said, "I am fighting for freedom and liberty. This kind of freedom and liberty will change the world." 1779, he went back to France and he got more help. The last battle of the Revolutionary War, 50% of the soldiers fighting that day were from France, along with their ships. We may say, we won the war, or we. The French helped us incredibly. When Lafayette went home, he took soil from Bunker Hill. And when he died, and I believe it was 1834, it was in Paris, he was buried in soil from America. That's how much it meant to him. We won the war. Incredible. Miracles upon miracle. We won the British. Now, I'm going to have to cut myself short here. Just know this. We went on with confusion and trouble with that many of the generals that served with General Washington wanted him to be king. The man was livid. We wrote a constitution. Now, today, that constitution is the oldest written constitution in the world. And it is still the supreme law of this land. And it's important that we understand and remember we must do what we need to do to keep it that way. We must. We must. The Declaration of Independence was nothing more than an experiment. Nobody had ever done it before. Yet next year we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, of the birth of this great nation. Be incredible, citizens. Take it upon yourself to love this nation. And the one thing that I challenge you, be kind. Can you imagine what our world would be like if we were simply kind to one another? And then read 30 minutes a day. It will be good. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. I would like to see a raise of hands. How many of you are familiar with George Mason? I'm the founding father that nobody remembers, but that's okay. I had a neighbor that I loved for years and years and years in Dunson Hall, just north of Mount Vernon. I sold 100 acres to my friend George Washington. We were vestrymen. at the same church. We had a lot of, we were partners in a venture. Have you ever heard of the Ohio Company? His brothers helped start that, around 1752 or so. We had a couple 100,000 of acres that we got a charter from the King of England to settle Ohio. And I was the secretary of that venture until I left this earth. But I thought I'd come back today and share a little bit with you. I had some presentations ready for a new thing that actually you could see on your window up there, but it couldn't be run from this. So I'm gonna bounce back and forth just a little bit between today and the 1700s. I've just written a book, 3 versions of it. It'll be out in hardcover color this next week. It's called The Declaration's Forgotten Liberties. I'd like to go through a few things that are in there with you just to share some of the magic that happened that I was a part of way back. One of the things that I like to read that is in the introduction, there was a man that came a couple of 100 years after me, Martin Luther King, Jr. On August 28th, 1963, he gave a speech in Washington, D.C. at the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream. Near the very beginning of it, there is something that a lot of people are not familiar with. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I say to you today, my friends, that in spite of the difficulties and frustrations of the moment, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. Back over 50 years ago, about 55 years ago, I was a lumberjack in Idaho, and a tree hit me on the head, and I almost died. Couldn't sit through my classes in college. My wife's parents came out and saw how badly I was doing. I'm now in the 20th century. So they took us back to Philadelphia, where they lived, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. My father from Oregon called me and told me that, I hope you don't mind my bouncing back and forth between then and now. But he told me that our ancestors lived right by where I was in about 1683. And he told me that our first grandmother from Germany had attended the first anti-slavery meeting ever held in America, the 1688 Germantown Petition against slavery. Then he told me there were 2 Castleberry homes. My name is Charles Castleberry. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, 2 old stone homes. Do you know where they are from the 1700s? Somewhere near a town with the word college in it was all he knew. State College, that's Penn State University. Well, that wasn't there for another 150 years. But about a year later, I had an appointment at a town called Collegeville. The word college in it. I was a mile out of town, and it flashed into my mind, I wonder if it might have been Collegeville. A flashing yellow light by an old Church of England church and cemetery, 1700. I turned left with the thought, I wonder if it might have been Collegeville. I went around a corner, past an old, beautiful stone bank barn, around another corner, and I stopped and I walked up to a door, and on the door it said Castleberry House. They took me inside and showed me. They had just bought it from the last Castleberries a couple of years before, restored it. The other Castleberry house adjacent to it they took me to. After they took me into the barn, big, beautiful German stone bank barn. Washington's headquarters, September 20th, 1777. The night of the Paoli massacre. He heard about that massacre the next morning. and he held a council of war in the glebe house of that Church of England, now an Episcopal church. My great friend, Father Mike Sowards, is there with a wonderful congregation. There were a bunch of Castleberries in that graveyard. Turn! Why would you walk up to a house? We visited there 35 years later from here. I said, do you mind if we go up and see if that house is still standing? For sale by auction. Oh, it was going to be torn down and some businesses built there. I said, why don't you not hold the auction? Are you going to make an offer? Well, I better ask my wife. We did, and we restored that home. We began to be bombarded with history. After the ghosts the first night. It was crazy. But I told them I was their cousin, and we're just fixing things up, and the rattling stopped. Till 2 o'clock the next morning at the same time, rattle, 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 rattle. And I have no idea why, but it never came back again. The second night I said, I'm your cousin, and we're just doing this for you, and it never came back again. And then I found out that 1688 petition against slavery that I just told you about, his daughter owned our farm in 1700. Her daughter married Paul Castleberry. Then I looked at the 1688 petition against slavery, and I held that document in my hand, and it's an incredible document. These Germans found out that 50% of the English Quakers owned slaves. 70% of the leadership, including William Penn, owned slaves. He'd rather have slaves than indentured servants because he didn't lose his investment in a slave at the end of his indenture. And then I learned that these Germans were invited by William Penn, Quakers and Mennonites. My grandfather was a Mennonite. They were the Anabaptists. About 4,000 to 5,000 of them were burned, beheaded, hung, buried alive, and drowned for believing in baptism by immersion. These Anabaptists. And they would never deny it. And then over a 100-year period, and I could have gone 100 years earlier and 100 years later, war after war after war came through that territory and destroyed their homes and their farms. 5 times as many civilians died as soldiers. They had to come. They came to America. Then a few years ago, I began reading Thomas Jefferson's Summary View of the Rights of British America. How many of you have ever read that document? It is one of the most important documents in our history. It was written July of 1774, the same month that George Mason wrote Counter Resolves with this man. Was it Fairfax? I can't remember our county right now. We even called for abolishing the slave trade. So George Mason received word, along with other leaders in Virginia. John Adams had sent a letter to all the colonies saying, the Second Continental Congress, you need to write your own constitutions for each of your states, each of your colonies. We may be declaring independence. Thomas Jefferson arrived about, it was May 10th. He sent that letter. He got there about to Philadelphia from Virginia about May 12th or so. He wanted to go back to Virginia to help write the Constitution for Virginia with me in Williamsburg. So he started writing a constitution, a proposed constitution. At the same time, I was writing a constitution in Virginia. There were others that helped me, but I wrote it. It was mine. It is the foundation of what became the Virginia plan for our Constitution later. I wrote another document called the Virginia Declaration of Rights. This became a part of most of the states' constitutions throughout as they came in later. But this did not become appended to the Virginia Constitution. It was a second document, a guiding document. 16 articles were in this. But you know what? I wrote the Constitution at the same time. It was pretty good. It was accepted and adopted. At the same time, Thomas Jefferson's in Philadelphia, another great Virginian friend of mine, he sent his Constitution down to us to consider. But we had already accepted mine. Except I needed an introduction. We call it a preamble. The preamble to the Virginia Constitution is all of the grievances of the Declaration of Independence, mostly word for word, that my friend Thomas Jefferson wrote in the last 3 weeks of May and the first 2 weeks and a half of June. And he sent it on June 12th, the day after he began actually writing the Constitution with the Declaration as part of the committee. Why did I write it in a day and a half? Because I had already written it. I had all the principles written in the summary view. Jefferson had all the principles written in the summary view of the rights of British America 2 years before. He wrote them for the First Continental Congress Virginia delegates. They said it was too radical. It's long paragraphs explaining every little sentence that become the grievances and all of the principles for the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. As you look at that became appended, and that's now the preamble to the Virginia Constitution of June 1776. It's my Constitution with Thomas Jefferson's grievances to say why we have to have independence from the king. As we compare the grievances of the Declaration with what I appended to my Constitution in Virginia, this is what was written in Virginia. This is what was written in Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration, and then Benjamin Franklin and John Adams helped Thomas change a couple of things. They are word for word. The Declaration was written already, 2/3 of it, and then we needed an introduction. The introduction is credited to me, George Mason. Wherever you look, it's taught that George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights is what Thomas Jefferson used to write the introduction or the preamble to his grievances. I got them from him. They were written 2 years before, all of them. But what's interesting is we get to the grievances, the last grievance that's in there, in his rough draft, is Jefferson's lost clause. This long, long clause here is the slavery clause. 11 states voted to accept Jefferson's Constitution with that. 2 said no. Georgia, South Carolina. Now what's interesting is the last clause that he had in there said the king was inciting insurrections amongst our fellow subjects. Then when he began writing on June 11th, he was copying from the notes that he had sent down to Virginia. The king is inciting insurrections amongst our fellow subjects. We were subjects to the king, weren't we? While the ink was wet, he wiped out the word subjects, and over it he wrote citizens in a moment of inspiration. Oh, and then he crossed out the word subjects on the notes that he had sent down to Virginia, and he wrote citizens over the top. But he wiped out, and you can see it on here, there was a drips underneath. Just a few years ago, somebody at the Library of Congress wanted to find out what's under the word citizens. She used this technology, brought out the word subjects was underneath what is on his rough draft. We became a new people, a new social contract. And as citizens, we have rights and we have responsibilities that we did not have as subjects. Now, in case anybody wonders, Well, yes, Thomas Jefferson was inspired by the Virginia Declaration of Rights to write the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. On the left is what's in the Declaration of Independence. In the middle is what I wrote in the Virginia Declaration of Rights. On the right is what Thomas Jefferson wrote 2 years earlier. I borrowed it from him, and everybody thinks it was me. And here's another one. The king gets his rights from the people. He wrote it 2 years earlier. He didn't get it from me. And when the government becomes contradictory to what needs to happen, it's our right and it's a responsibility to abolish it, institute a new government. You know, George and I, we invested in the Ohio Company. This is what our charter said. One of the grievances says the king is destroying our charters, right? Well, a lot of the land that we claimed, France also claimed. All the land that drained into the Mississippi River was New France. So George, he went up all the way up here by Lake Erie to tell the French to leave. And he started a war. It was the World War. The 7-Year War or the French and Indian War. Way to go. He fought. I won't tell you the miracles. He might. After the war, the king disregarded all of our charters. I had invested in the Ohio Company and got 200,000 acres, and we've got after we got 100 families to settle, we would get another 200,000 acres. His brothers and me, Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia, the king took all the land that France had claimed for him. And he drew a line right here called the Proclamation Line of 1763, and we can't go beyond the crest of the Appalachians. Daniel Boone kind of snuck over, but his son was killed and a lot of others. The king took that land. It became the province of Quebec. You think of Quebec as France, right? We got it from them as a settlement for the French and Indian War. And then we fought a war. 4 of the grievances were about he controls how we settle our lands. He also, well, the French envoy after the war presented this map. This map kept Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Quebec. That's a lot of land. And it's land that our charters had. Our charters went to the Mississippi and some of them to the South Sea. That's the Pacific Ocean. So Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams said no to the French proposal. We'll deal directly with the British. They recognized our independence. They recognized our western borders to the Mississippi River, and they tripled the size of our nation. Oh, you know what else the French guys did? Do you see where the yellow part is on the map? That's Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee. He gave that to Spain to control those Indians in that territory. So we were crushed against the eastern seaboard by 2 other powers. Franklin won the day. It's about so much more than a 2% tax on tea. I won't go on much more, just except for I told you I didn't inspire him to write the preamble, but what I don't get credit for is what I did. My Virginia Declaration of Rights, I took that with me to the Constitutional Convention. We needed a Bill of Rights. James Madison would not go for it. I fought him and fought him and fought him. No. If it's not in there, the government doesn't have it. It belongs to the people. Not good enough. Freedom of press, freedom of religion, etc. We needed it. These were mine. So I said I would rather cut off my right hand than sign the document as it stood. I fought against it. I lost my best friend. He wanted it signed. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, fought with me. We can't have a document that won't protect our rights. There will be a new monarchy arise. So I didn't sign it. James Madison promised Massachusetts that if they did sign it, he would go ahead and put a Bill of Rights in. They did. We were not one of the first 9 states to sign it as Virginians. But we finally did. It was included. Who was the father of the Bill of Rights? James Madison, who fought its inclusion. Now, the Constitution was an inspired document. I raised myself 130 times to make suggestions. One of the top 3 people, and I wouldn't sign it. But I adore it now. And it's misunderstood. For example, the 3/5 clause, people took as being very demeaning to our slaves and our Indians who didn't pay taxes. The South had more population than the North when you count the slaves. Population for House of Representatives representation was by population. That meant that there would be 37 in the South and 35 in the North. So the North said, you can't count slaves. They're not your constituents. You're not looking out for their interests. You can't count them at all. That would have been 36, 37 to 25. Too big of a gap. South said no. So my good friend Wilson from Pennsylvania came up with a suggestion. He said, let's just count 60%, and we'll only charge you 60% of taxes as well on that part of the population. They went ahead with it. Then it was 35 in the North, 30 in the South, representatives. The slavery agenda was overcome. And then 20 years later, Thomas Jefferson, as president, got Congress to fight and ban the importation of slaves into America. In that document that Jefferson had written in 1774, he said that the abolition of domestic slavery is the great desire in these colonies where it was unhappily introduced by the king. But he thought we have to cut off the supply first. And they did in 1808. America was the first country to ban the importation of slaves. March 2nd, 1807, the legislation was passed. 3 weeks later, England did it, March 25th, 1807, and the whole world thinks they did it first. Well, guess what? There's one last thing I just want to show you. It is this. Slavery was evil. 10.5 million slaves came across from Africa to the Americas. 5 million of them came to Brazil. 750,000 died crossing the Atlantic just going to Brazil. 1.8 million died crossing the Atlantic. Another 4 million died in Africa before being put on board ship. Another 8 million to 15 million went up to the North and the East African slave trade. And you look at America, you see this little one right here? 388,000 came to mainland North America, slaves from Africa, out of the 10.5 million. Of those, 301,000 were brought by British ships, the British flag. So of the 364 years of the slave trade, this little one in the spyglass right here, in magnifying glass, that's the United States of America, 63,927 of the 10.5 million. They became 4 million by the Civil War. A lot of people think that they were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed none. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free any slaves in the states that didn't secede. Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, they remained as slaves. Plus, by that time, the Union had control of New Orleans, some counties in Virginia, a few others, a dozen counties or so. Those slaves weren't freed. Just as patterns happen, the Declaration of Independence declared our rights, but won no rights. We had to win a war. Then we needed to enshrine those rights in laws. So in my book, I have each of, for example, the grievances, what Jefferson wrote about it 2 years before, another historian, the background, and then which sections and articles in the Constitution protect and safeguard every single line of the Declaration of Independence. These are inspired documents. Being a citizen of the United States has wonderful opportunities and responsibilities. We look forward this next week to remember that and to begin the 250th anniversary as we remember. Thank you.
Well, my young friends out there, and I can say young because after all, you are now rather younger than I am at over 300 years of age. Delighted to be with you today. I want to tell you a few things that you may not have heard of before. At the end of the war, when we had finally won our independence, we nearly lost it again. It's really quite simple. You see, my men had suffered for 8 long years in starvation and in the cold, and they had given so much, sacrificing for this country to be born. And finally, they asked for some kind of remuneration, some kind of reward from Congress. And Congress was not going to give that to them. And so these gentlemen, my officers, desired that they would march on Congress and seize Congress and extract from their pockets that which was so justly due them. Now, I knew that if that happened, everything that we had fought for so long would be lost once and for all, and we would be back into the morass again. So I, at the time when they were getting together at a place called Newburgh, they were all together. They didn't know I was coming in, but I walked into the room and I began to speak to these young gentlemen, these very good patriots, good people really overall, to persuade them to put off their desires, give Congress that small amount of time necessary to reward them appropriately. I began to speak to them, and they were getting more and more hardened in their hearts because they saw in my eyes that I was simply one of their own enemies as well. I spoke longer, and they became more and more hardened, and finally I reached down and I began to look at some notes that would tell me a little bit of what we needed to do in order to keep our freedom going. And as I looked at the notes, the letters swam before my eyes because I was extremely nearsighted. And people were, I couldn't read the notes that I had here on the page, and I stumbled upon them and they thought I was stalling for time. They stalled a little bit longer, and then finally, in embarrassment, I reached into my pocket and I brought out my spectacles, my glasses. And as I put them on my face, I said to them all, I said, "Gentlemen, I have grown gray in your service, and now I find I'm going blind." And they were stunned. They had never seen me wear spectacles before. And then they contemplated that we had all shared for 8 long years the same sacrifices that they all knew of so well. And with tears in their eyes, they all as a man resolved they would give to Congress that small amounts of time necessary to fulfill their obligations to all of them. Smallest gestures sometimes can make the largest difference. You know, it's interesting because one of the things I learned passing into the eternal realms is that the same gracious God that gives you these magnificent bodies will restore them to their perfection upon your passing into the eternities. But that same gracious God allowed me to retain this one small token of my mortality. I suspect to remind a sometimes rather proud man of my dependence upon God. We're going to talk about miracles here today. The entire history of this nation hinged upon miracles, and as was alluded to at the Battle of the Monongahela, the very first one. There were many, many more. We don't have enough time because I do not want to deny this lady the time she needs to speak to you. Her message is very important. But I will tell you this. Every step along the way that brought us to a free people and a free nation was secured by miracles from God. I am firmly of that conviction. They happened over and over and over again in the war. The Brooklyn fog, the shad of the run of into the Valley Forge, the river up that went through Valley Forge, over and over and over again. I was witness to the great miracles that built this nation. It all started at the Battle of the Monongahela, as I said. You see, I was serving as a British officer, really the colonel of the Virginia militia, serving under General Braddock. And General Braddock had about 1,200 men. He'd been tasked to go out and to attack the French and Indian forces along the Monongahela River. And General Braddock was a brilliantly trained British officer, disciplined, strong. He knew exactly how to fight. But I knew that he was also one of the dumbest human beings I've ever met in my entire life. And so I tried to persuade General Braddock, look, sir, we are not in Europe. We're in America. We don't fight that way. We don't march down the middle of a road with our swords in perfect formation, making perfect marching steps all the way along the way. If we do, we'll die. So what we do is we hide behind the rocks and the trees, and then what happens is the enemy doesn't see us, and we then leap out of the rocks and trees, and we kill him, and he doesn't kill us. And General Braddock was indignant. Well, Colonel, I don't understand that. You're a British officer. How can you say such things? No, we're going to fight the way you always do. We're going to march down the middle of a road holding our swords in perfect formation like this, with the cross in the middle of our chest. I think you call that a bullseye. And as we got closer to the French and Indians, they did exactly what I expected. As we got into a cut in the road, they leaped out of the forest and they started to kill our men. And then for the next 3.5 hours, it was a butcher. We lost 964 men that day out of 1,200. They lost 50. Every officer on the field, including General Braddock, was either killed or wounded, except one, Colonel Washington, upon his horse. I was able to rally the rest of the men and brought them out of the battle, and we gathered around here, and I got off my horse, and I found there was a bullet hole through my hat. There were 4 through my coat and 1 here over my chest, surrounded with powder burns. And I realized that I had been literally held in the hands of Providence, as we called it then, and protected. I wrote home about that. 1755. Well, 15 years later, I went back to the same area, surveying land, and I had a particular purpose in mind. We'll discuss that when we have more time another time. And so as I walked out of a forest into a meadow, out the other side came an elderly Indian chief being held up by his braves. And he came up to me and he said in beautiful English, he said, I had to meet the man God would not let die. Chief, I don't understand. What do you mean? And he explained that he'd been the commander of the Indian forces on the field that day 15 years previous. And that as they began to slaughter the British soldiers, they saw one man, one officer, still upon his horse, yours truly, and he realized, if we kill that man, we'll wipe out the British to the last man. So I took my best archers, he said. I took my best bowmen. I took my best gunmen. Kill the man on that horse. Let everybody else alone. Kill that man. We will win this battle. And so for the next 3 hours, every arrow, every bullet, every spear they could get went my way. And finally, after a while, his braves kept coming back to him. They said, we don't understand. We shoot an arrow at that man and goes straight at him and suddenly sinks into the ground. We throw a spear. It's as if he's surrounded by a glass wall. Our guns will not fire if they're facing him properly. And the Indian chief said, I realized you were in the hands of the Great Spirit. And so I said, leave him alone. He is the chosen man. No bullet will ever touch him. And so this Indian chief said, the Great Spirit is very strong on me. I have seen that you will become the leader of the greatest empire in the history of man, and that your name will be held in honor through all time. No bullet, Colonel, will ever touch you. That prophecy held true. I was a witness at the very beginning of my career of great miracles. And as I say, there were many others in the war that followed. And here I'm going to show you 2 of the greatest miracles of them all. One of them right here is called the Declaration of Independence. How extraordinary. A people stood upon their feet and said to the king, Your Majesty, no, we're not going to obey you ever again. We're going to be free, and we're going to give this as a gift to our children. There were 56 men who signed that document, 56 men who pledged their lives, their fortune, their sacred honor, that that promise would be fulfilled. They fulfilled their promise. Some of the men that signed at the bottom of that document died during the war. Some of them saw their own sons butchered before their eyes. Some of them had their families torn away from them, never to see their families again. Many died at the last destitute. And did you know, not one of those 56 men ever said the price was too high. They said it was worth everything we paid. And that was followed by as you indicated, sir, the Constitution of the United States, what an incredible document. The first written constitution in the history of man. Now the oldest constitution upon the earth. And did you know that 80% of all the constitutions around the world are based on that document right there? This is the past, but it is not the past because it lives still. It lives still, and we need heroes to step forward for this nation today. How do you become a hero for the United States of America? Well, let me tell you, there's a couple of things you need to know. I was president for 2 terms, 8 years. I hated it. I did not want to be president. I did not want the power. I wanted to go home and be a farmer. 2 years into my presidency, I wrote my farewell address to the American people. I put it aside because I wasn't going to go at that point. They made it clear I wasn't going to, but I kept it still. And here's what I said in it. I gave to the American people a warning of how you will be free forever. Among other things, I said, remember who you are. When I came forward to take the oath of inauguration, the oath of office, I stepped up towards the stand, and as I came closer, I was not dressed as a general or as a gentleman. I was dressed in a plain brown cotton homespun suit of an American farmer. As I got closer, everybody was a little embarrassed to look at me because I was dressed so plainly. One of them was John Adams, who was a little bit stuffy and prickly at times. And he finally came up and in a stage whisper, he said to me, well, General, I don't understand why I dress you so plainly on so important an occasion. And I looked at John and I said, well, John, you're indeed most handsome this day. Why, you and my friends, you're dressed in every color. It looks as though a rainbow has descended to earth, sir. It's a very important occasion, after all. I said, why, you wear the finest silks and satins, sir. Oh, see, John, those silken hose you wear were imported from France, weren't they? The satin on your back, sir, is a product of Great Britain, my enemy of late. See, John, the suit, as you see me wear, was spun by American hands from American-grown cotton. The seamstress was an American. The very buttons, sir, were forged in America. Mr. Adams, I'm an American. You want to be free. Remember who you are. I said also, avoid permanent entangling alliances with other nations. When there comes a time when we must join together to win the battle, do so. We did so with France. But then part as friends, and your children, your sons, will never need to go around the world to die in foreign lands. I said also, avoid the spirit of political parties. Political parties are merely engines of destruction and of contention. Your loyalty must be to your country, not to a party. And this Constitution, I said, it was written verily by the finger of God. Therefore, do not invent upon it carelessly. When changes are necessary, put them into place. Man is, after all, imperfect. But think very seriously before you change that document, or you will be insulting the God that gave you that document. And I said, the other part about it is, man cannot be free in the absence of religion and morality. You cannot be free. Man will be ruled by God or he will be ruled by tyrants. There is nothing in between. Now that does not answer the question, how can you be a hero? And so I'm calling on a young lady representing George Washington's greatest hero of his entire life. Now, you may think that Mr. Mason or Ben Franklin is the greatest hero. They are indeed heroes. But the greatest hero of George Washington's life was Eleanor Parke Custis Washington, his beloved Nellie, his granddaughter. You see, he had 2 children. No, he didn't actually. He never had any children of his own, so he adopted his granddaughter and his grandson as his children and brought them into the home. She changed the man to make him a far greater man than he'd ever been before. And let me tell you how that happened. First of all, Eleanor Parke Custis Washington was not a usual girl. Oh, no, no, no. You spoke 5 languages. You played 7 musical instruments. You were America's first ambassador to France at 16 years of age. Not a usual young lady. And she was also a lady that you did not cross. You see, after I had passed into the eternal realms, there was a reporter And he said in his newspaper, George Washington was not a good Christian because he did not use the name of God all the time, and he did not attend church on a regular basis. And on the other side, I said, oh, Mr. Reporter, you made a serious mistake, and you're going to pay a price. Because you see, first of all, I had 85 names for God. I changed them constantly so God would not be insulted by being constantly referred to in that way. And secondarily, it's a little hard to attend church when the British Army is chasing you all over the landscape, isn't it? Yes, indeed. And the third thing he forgot, that reporter forgot, Eleanor. You see, she was a force to be reckoned with. And what happened was, you read that letter from the reporter, didn't you? And she wrote back to him. And if you ever read that letter, be sure you're holding it with hot pads. She was mad. And she gave this man all he could handle. She said, how dare you accuse my grandfather, George Washington, of not being a Christian? Why don't you just say he wasn't even an American? And then you said something very important to that reporter, didn't you? What did you tell him? You remember? Oh, your memory's failing you, my dear. She said, oh, by the way, Mr. Reporter, at the end of her letter, just so you know, I talked to your paper. You're fired. Oh, and I talked to every other reporter and every other paper out there. You're fired from everybody. I hope you find a nice way to make a living from here on. Was I a good Christian? If you ever have a question about that, outside of my headquarters, everybody had the stars and stripes flying outside their headquarters except for General Washington. I didn't have that. Well, how terrible, right? You're not supposed to agree, my dear. So, this was my flag. Would you hold that in, my dear? This was George Washington's command flag. How is it different? No stripes, right? And there's something about those stars, too. You see, here's what happened. My men would come up to me, and my officers say, now, wait a minute. That's your, why, where are the stripes? I said, gentlemen, we will not be free if we do not keep our eyes on God at all times. Therefore, my flag will reflect the blue of heaven only, so that whenever I look at my flag, I'll remember the only reason I have a flag, only reason I have a country, is because of God. And it is the Star of David. They asked about that. I said, well, here's why. Because we're establishing a new Israel in the land. Thank you. But you're not done yet. Oh, no, no, no. You thought you escaped. You see, there was something else. George Washington was known to be a little bit stuffy and a little bit stiff, wasn't he, at times? A little difficult to deal with. What happened was there came a time when I thought we had just adopted these young people and brought them into our lives, and I thought, well, I need to meet my granddaughter, and she's now my daughter, of course, you know. And so what happened was they used to have a little room with black and white tile right by the foyer, and that's where you would play, right? You and all the friends. No, that's a good one. And by the way, your hair is exactly like the color mine was. That's one reason I really like it. And freckles too, just like I did. So, yes, I've gotten older. It's no longer red. Sorry. And so one day they were playing there, and they'd been in my home for a couple of weeks, and I thought, you know, I really need to meet my own children. So I walked in while you were playing with your friends, and I sat down. And then I looked at her, and I became terrified of my daughter. The general, the president, scared of a little girl. And I went like that. And you went like that because you were scared of me. After about 5 minutes of silence, she looked up and she saw I was crying. And I had to leave the room. And you know what you did? You remember? You wrote in your journal, all right, I'm going to teach him how to be a grandpa. And she did. You see, whenever people would come over to Mount Vernon and visit us, what would happen was Martha would take the adults upstairs and entertain them. Little Eleanor would walk up to me. She says, all right, Grandpa, you're going with me. You took my hand. You led me to the little room with black and white tile where you and George Jr. and all the children were playing. And for the rest of the evening, George Washington, retiring president of the United States and general for 40 years, played hopscotch with the children. And I said, I've never had more fun in my entire life. At the end of my life, I said, the greatest hero I have ever met was Eleanor Parke Custis Washington, who taught me how to be a man. she became the most famous woman in the world. At the end of her life, she said the greatest accomplishment you ever had was you're the first person ever to make George Washington laugh out loud in public. Thank you, my dear. Now, the question is, can you be heroes? Well, if a young lady can change the life of a general and a president, yes, you can. This nation rests in your hands with the help of God. My final thought is that if we will be free, we must remember religion and morality. It is the basis of everything. And now I need to let this young lady have some time here. Thank you.
You hear me? My name is Ruth Harrington. Who's heard of me before? Well, that might be a point that the degree of your fame has nothing to do with the degree of your sacrifice. I was 18 years old when I married the love of my life, Jonathan Harrington. We lived in a lovely village, Lexington. Does anyone know where Lexington is? Yes, just 14 miles west of Boston, in an absolutely lovely village, just 5 miles from Concord as well. And my husband and I, we fell in love. And what do people do when they fall in love? They get married. And then we had a child, a little boy, and he was wonderful. And then, because my husband was so extraordinary, what did he do for me? What do women like after they get married and they have a child? What do they want to live in? A home. Well, as was the English practice, always in England, and of course, us being British, we followed to suit. Every town has a town green or a town square, and then people build their homes around the town square and build out from there. And we were very blessed because we found a home for sale that was right on Lexington Green. So we had our home right on the green. We had this lovely colonial home, very much like many colonial homes that you have seen. The door right in the middle on the lower level, 2 windows on each side, upper level, 2 windows on each side on the upstairs. And so was our lovely home with white and green shutters. And we were very happy. Life was actually very bliss, actually very wonderful. And we were so happy. And then we had another baby, and he was about almost 1 year old. And then there we were, went to bed, sound asleep, and about 1:30 in the morning, we heard pounding on our door saying, "Wake up, get up, the redcoats are coming." And we knew exactly what that meant, and the terror that went through our hearts. Because we had been living under martial law for so long, having the redcoats in our neighborhoods, in our homes, all around us at all times, being tyrannical over us, guarding over us, watching our every movement, surveilling us constantly. And did we like it? Would you? No, we did not like it one bit. We were very used to governing ourselves and very capable of governing ourselves, and we were not accustomed to it, and we were not well with it. And so we had been warned that the king may send his soldiers over, and we knew that that warning was very important and very dangerous. Now, we went to church at the local church. Jonas Clark was our pastor, very lovely man, and all of our town attended church there. My husband and I did, and as a wonderful minister, he taught us from the Bible, and he said, "We shall never stand and start a war. We will never fire first, because that is ungodly and unbiblical. But if we are ever fired upon, if our countrymen and the king's men should come and fire upon us, we have every godly right to defend ourselves." And so our militia would practice on occasion, get together and practice, and they would be prepared. And my Jonathan, being such a lover of liberty, he was prepared. And so at 1:30, he got out of bed and got prepared and got ready, and I got up And I gave him a big hug, knowing full well the potential sacrifice of my husband and myself. He went out, and as it was, this was the very night that Paul Revere was told by Dr. Joseph Warren that the Redcoats were coming in. He knew that they were coming, but he did not know yet if they were coming by land or by sea. He also wanted all of the countrymen to be able to be prepared and to know which way they would be coming so that they could be prepared to defend themselves. And we all knew what the king wanted. He wanted to capture whom? John Hancock and Samuel Adams, because they were the pot stirrers. They were stirring everyone up to this insurrection and this rebellion against tyranny, against the king. So he wanted to get them, but he also knew a very important truth. He knew that as farmers, and not necessarily soldiers, we had two things: muskets and what good is your musket without? Ammunition. He knew we had our muskets and we had our ammunition, and he also knew if we did not have muskets and ammunition, could we defend ourselves? He knew we could not, as well we did. So when we had heard through the spies from Dr. Joseph Warren that the king might be sending his soldiers, what did we do with our ammunition and our muskets? The king had heard they were in Concord, so what did we do? We got them hidden and away from Concord. We literally dug holes and buried them in deep holes where they would not be seen, not be noticed. But we had taken care of that. So Paul Revere went to warn all of the people of the towns, and especially those in Lexington and Concord, and to warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams. So my husband with 76 other men went out onto the town green. Now, because I lived on Lexington Green, I had a perfect view of the town square. And do you think I could sleep? No, I couldn't. So do you think I went back to bed? Not for a moment. I stood at the window and I watched. And they waited and they waited and they waited. And the soldiers, the Redcoats did not come. And so John Parker, our leader, he sent the men home. He said, go back because we don't even know for sure if they're coming or what has happened. So he sent the men back home. So my Jonathan came back home. How do you think I felt about that? Quite thrilled. I was ever so happy. I was so pleased. Such relief. But then, when John Parker found that the British soldiers, the Redcoats, were indeed coming, he had his drummers drum and the fifes fife to give us notice that it was time to come back together, that indeed the Redcoats were coming. So again, I said goodbye to my lovely, wonderful, sweet husband, Jonathan. I kissed him as he went out the door, and then again, my little one-year-old was up, so I put him on my hip and held him on my hip as I stood at the window and I watched. Now, John Parker was a very wise man. He was not necessarily a military man, but he was wise and he knew some degree of fighting and the protocol of the military. So he had 77 men. Do you think that the king was going to send over more than 77 men? Slightly more? Or a great deal more? He knew that it would be a lot of men. Did he want to stand in the center of the green and take on a large army? No, he did not. He was not foolish. But he did want to take a stand. He said, we will stand against the tyranny. And so he had our men, including my Jonathan and his two brothers, they stood on the edge, the very edge of the green, which was customary to say, we are standing in defiance, but we will allow you to pass by us, because we are not standing here to start a war or to take you on. So there they stood. And as they stood there, 5 o'clock in the morning, as the sun started to rise, they saw the lobsterbacks, the Redcoats, approaching them. They fully expected the redcoats to march on by. As they stood there with their muskets, very proud, very stern, and very strict, they stood. But what do you think General Patriot, the lobsterback general, what do you think he had his men do? Did he have them march on? No, he did not. He had them come right up to our wonderful men, stood right there in defiance, and then he yelled out, and I did hear him, he yelled out, "Drop your weapons immediately, you filthy, vile, great radicals." And what did our men do? They stood strong with their muskets. They didn't move a muscle. They stood very bravely, very defiantly, but not in your face. And then again, General Patriot, "Drop your weapons, you filthy, vile radicals. Drop them now." And what did our men do? They stood strong and they stood there. The third time, he yelled again, "Drop your weapons, you filthy, vile radicals." And our men stood their ground. And then John Parker saw this was not going to end well. He did not want to retreat, because we did not want to retreat to our king. He also did not want to stand and be slaughtered. So he did the third option, which was peaceably dissemble. So at that time, he told our men to turn around and just carefully and slowly walk away and walk back to our homes. And so our men did. They turned, and as they walked away, suddenly a shot was heard, known as the shot heard around the world. When that shot was heard, what did the British soldiers do? They started firing their weapons, and they fired at our soldiers, our countrymen. Shot 8 of them in the back. 17 more were wounded. And as I stood at the door, at my window, I watched so much musket smog, I could no longer see the soldiers. But then I noticed my Jonathan. He was facing towards me. He was coming towards our house. He got right to the edge of the lawn, and I saw him shot in the back, in the front of him, being blasted. He dropped to his knees. He got up on his elbows, and he looked at me, and I looked at him. And then he got on his elbows and scooted himself across the road. I set my baby down. I ran to the door. I got to the front porch. I knelt down, and I scooped my sweet husband into my arms. And we embraced and said goodbye to each other as he passed to the other side. I was devastated, but we both knew that it was a price we were willing to pay, that our children and their children and your children could live in freedom. And as it was, our town rallied. Our town came together. And as they marched on to Concord, our people came out in droves, over 500 to 700 of our Minutemen and militia came and stood and fought. And you wouldn't believe the English army, the King's men, in their beautiful uniforms, turned and ran as fast as they could to run away. Not long after, there was another battle. You may have heard of it. The Battle of Bunker Hill. This is the battle where, again, such wisdom, such forethought. We knew we needed to teach something to take Boston back. The king had taken complete control of Boston, and we were not okay with it. So we had this brilliant idea to dig redoubts in Bunker Hill. That order was to build the redoubts in Bunker Hill. And, well, actually, the order was to build the redoubts in Breeds Hill. And so they did. And so they all through the night, our men all through the night were building these redoubts, digging them out. And then they were able to get in them and hide themselves to be protected. And in the morning, when the sun came out, the British soldiers looked up, and to their absolute amazement and complete surprise, what did they see on Breed's Hill? They saw our men, but in protection. And so they said, no problem. These are mere farmers and merchants. They're no problem for us. We're the greatest army in the world. We can take them on, no problem. And so they attempted to. And as they went up, our men were told, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes, because we knew we did not have adequate ammunition. We had courage, we had conviction, we were prepared, but we did not have adequate ammunition. And it was also a very brilliant plan, because as the British came up, they were firing at our men, but they couldn't really reach very many of our men at all. They could hardly get anyone. But our men waited until they could see their whites of their eyes, where again, if you're familiar with the musket, is it very accurate? No, it's not. You have to be very close range. But are you at close range when you can see the whites of their eyes? Very close range. So then when they fired, it was a complete massacre. They fell. And then the British sent the next campaign. And what happened to them? They fell. Again, massive slaughter. But then on the third attempt of the British, we were mostly out of ammunition. So as they approached, many of our men had to retreat and run. But Dr. Joseph Warren refused to. Even as a commissioned officer, he said, I want to fight on the front lines with my men. And that he did. And when the British soldiers saw him, because they really detested him, they had such a great hate for him, because he was such a lover of America and liberty, they shot him right in the forehead and killed him. And that was not enough. What did they do with him after that? They took their bayonets, knowing full well he was dead, and they bayoneted him over 20 times. They took his clothing, his beautiful suit off, they did that first, and kept it, and then stabbed him and left him there naked and cut to pieces. They cut his head off and put him in a shallow grave. It wasn't for 10 months that his best friend, Paul Revere, who was a silversmith, also did dental work on the side. He had actually made a false tooth for Dr. Warren, and so he was able to identify him through that. So my dear friend, Sarah Bradley Fulton. How many have heard of Sarah Bradley Fulton? A great American hero. She was my dear friend. When she witnessed the battle, she went out right after. And she started to take care of the men, and she got other women around her, and they went and they started caring for the soldiers. They tended to their wounds, and they helped them. They took them to their homes, and they dressed their wounds, and they took great care of them. And then Sarah came across a British man, a British soldier, who was very badly wounded. And he said, oh, please, ma'am, please attend to me, please help me, please take care of me. She said, are you serious? You come and you take arms against your own countrymen, you fire upon us. You are my enemy. Why would I possibly tend to your wounds or help you in any way? And he kept begging her, I will die if you do not help me. Please help me. Please. And what did Sarah do? She thought about her teachings as a Christian. And what did Christ say to do with our enemies? Love your enemies. Help those who persecute you. And so her tender side did get the best of her. And she did take care of this man and take care of his wounds and help him. And he was healed. And at this time, where there's so much division and so much unrest and so much peace, I think Sarah has taught us a great lesson that we are called upon not because they deserve it, not because they have earned it, but for ourselves, that we learn to love our enemy and do good to them who persecute us and vile against us. So I hope that as you celebrate this wonderful 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, of Patrick Henry's speech, of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and as we get ready to celebrate this amazing 249th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, that we will remember the great sacrifices that have been made by so many people and how they did that for you and I. Thank you so much.
Just one more big thank you to, I'm just going to say their names again. Wade Alexander was Ben Franklin. Chuck Castleberry was George Mason. Gary Dolzer was George Washington, and Delane England was Ruth Harrington. A big thank you to them, and I hope you all have a great holiday. Thank you. Anyway, thank you.
I can be up there. She wants a picture. Oh, no. Oh, no. Very old man like me getting pictures made. Good gravy.